Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar that's been presented on behalf of the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action on solar and batteries. To begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I am dialing in from today, which is the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend a very warm welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that might be joining us today at this webinar. Just a quick note, this webinar will be recorded. There is a chat function which is at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Simply click on the icon to use the chat. There is also a Q&A function. So this is at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Similarly, click on the icon to open the window, type in your question and press enter. You can also upvote questions by pressing the thumbs up icon. And there's also a raise hand in the middle of the bottom bar to indicate that you would like some assistance from tech support. So the who will be presenting on solar and batteries for us today is Andrew Redaway. Andrew's an energy analyst who has been involved with Renew for 10 years, helping households with independent energy advice. He's also worked for the Australian Energy Market Operator, the Australian Energy Foundation, and ANHA. He is trained in solar installation and is a certified passive house designer. So without any further ado, I will pass you over to Andrew.
Thanks for that introduction, Brendan. Great to be here. I'll just share my screen. So today I'm talking about solar and batteries with a slightly more emphasis on batteries than the solar, but we'll be covering the information about solar as well. And there's quite a lot of information in this presentation, so I'm not going to be speaking every word on the slides, but I think there's going to be the slides made available in some form after the webinar, so that should be useful. Okay, so before we get into the shiny, sexy technologies, it is worth mentioning some of the basics first. So one of the easiest things you can do to reduce your electricity bills is to shop around electricity and gas. So the best website for us Victorians is Victorian Energy Compare, which is a government site. So you can explore that. There's other sites. Whatever is a pretty good trusted commercial site. There's a bunch of others that are not so trusted because they may not be impartial. They may not even give you all the best deals. Some of them only show you the deals that they have a commercial relationship with. So that's something to watch out for. And another basic is energy efficiency. So today we're mostly talking about generating electricity with solar panels and storing it in batteries. But the best form of energy is the energy that you didn't need to use in the first place. So the example here is insulation in the ceiling cavity. So that's insulation bat over the plasterboard in your ceiling, like a blanket to hold the heat in winter and to resist the heat soaking through in summer. And there's also some foil underneath the roofing, which especially in summer helps to resist how much heat is radiating down from the roof. So things like that, draft ceiling, efficient appliances. We have whole webinars on all of that stuff. Getting off gas, of course. So all of those basics do make a lot of sense, and especially some of the things like draft ceiling. They're so cost effective. The payback time is fantastic. All right, so solar. So you've got panels on the roof. You get a direct environmental benefit of that, and because when you have solar, you have two electricity supplies into your house. You've got the panels on your roof, and you've also got the cable from the grid. I'm talking about the vast majority of suburban installations here. So whatever you use from the panels, you're not drawing from the grid, which is electricity that does not have to come from a centralized generator, which a lot of the time is fossil fuels. So that can give you a direct financial benefit as well. So at any point in time, you're generating on the roof, and your appliances have the first call on that electricity. So if at that point in time you're not using all of that electricity that's coming off your roof, then you've got an excess, and that excess automatically gets pushed into the grid, the poles and wires, and you earn a bit of money for that. It's not a massive amount, but it is still something. And especially when you've got like long summer days, it can actually add up, that feed-in tariff. It's an extra component on your bill savings. Speaking of which, if you look at your electricity bill, that's the only component that's itemized. The component of electricity that you don't use from the grid doesn't appear on your bill as an item, unfortunately, because it's not visible on the meter. So that's not showing up. So often we have people saying, "Oh, I'm not getting as much benefit as I expected," but they're only looking at that component which is itemized, which is what they're feeding into the grid, and they're not realizing all the other benefit they're getting. So payback time, you could be looking at 4 to 7 years, or maybe 5 to 9 years. It depends on a lot of things. I mean, in this slide, it talks about small houses and large houses, but there's such a variety of electricity consumption out there. There are swimming pools, heated swimming pools. There's people with massive IT setups. There's people baking pottery in a kiln in the backyard. Electric vehicles. Nowadays the variety of electricity consumption is really high. Oh, air conditioning. Some people have whole house air conditioning set at 20 degrees year round. Other people, they only turn on things when they need to for heating and cooling. So, yeah. Solar panels have dropped a lot in prices. So that's just a quick chart there from over the last decade and a bit. So that's great news. Okay, and just a note here. So we're talking about panels on the roof that generate electricity. You also see panels on a lot of roofs. Often they're like two panels side by side, and they just look kind of black. And usually those are not generating electricity. They're actually heating up hot water that goes down to a tank, which is usually at the ground level. You can sometimes have them up on the roof as well. That's a pretty good technology too. And as a default, we'd normally recommend a heat pump hot water system rather than a solar thermal hot water panel up on the roof. But we're talking about the electricity panels today, and we're up to already quite a proportion of homes have it already in Victoria. And that's the stat here saying 43% of homes that are suitable for solar. I'm not sure how that stat was derived, but I guess they're looking at things like apartment buildings and maybe even renters. Most installations going in don't have batteries, and there were some reasons for that, and we'll come back to that later. But solar by itself without a battery, generally gives a very good economic return. Okay, so solar panels on the roof, sunbeams hit them, pushes electricity out of the solar panels, down wires that go to an inverter, which is a box on the wall, or maybe in the garage, something like that. And what that's doing is it's converting that electricity to the standard electricity that's used in the house and the grid. 240 volt AC, alternating current, is a standard electricity. And then that sends electricity to the switchboard. And then from there, as I was saying, it can either go to your appliances and or go out to the grid if you've got an excess. Okay, rebates. So the main rebate is at a federal level. It's called an STC, and the good thing about this one is you don't really need to worry about it, because basically any quote that you get for a solar system, it will already have this factored in because everyone's eligible. Well, unless your solar installer does something really stupid, then you'll be eligible, and they are not going to make that mistake because they'll lose a lot of money as a solar installer. And the magnitude of this rebate, it does depend where you are in Australia, and because it's sort of scaled according to how much generation is expected from your solar system over a period of time. So yeah, in Melbourne, we don't get quite as much rebate as our friends up in Cairns or Adelaide or something, but yeah, still it's still very helpful. Now this rebate is phasing out gradually up to 2030. So well, yeah, that's probably makes sense because solar is doing pretty well. At some point, it probably should stand on its own 2 feet. And it's better for something to phase out gradually than to end in a big bang, because then you have all these, shifts in the market. So sometimes you get solar installers, solar retailers, like doing a bit of a scare tactic, and they say, "Oh, the rebate's ending in a month or something." It's probably not correct. They're probably just exaggerating. Okay, so the money that you get from pushing electricity into the grid, whatever power is excess at any point in time to what your appliances are using, is called a feed-in tariff, because you're feeding in electricity to the grid and earning a tariff, like a rate. And yeah, it's pretty low. So I think it's around 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's probably heading lower than that in Victoria. So that compares to what you may be paying when you import electricity from the grid, that may be like 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So it sounds like that's super unfair, right? There are actually reasons for that, and pretty valid reasons. So yeah, in our view, that's what's going on is appropriate, and in Victoria, it's monitored closely by the Essential Services Commission. They do a solid analysis every year to say what should be the minimum level for that feed-in tariff. So don't have time to go into the details of that, but if anyone's really keen, we can maybe cover that in questions. Okay, there's been some historical really high feed-in tariffs, like 60 cents, 25 cents. So this was back in the early days. So if you recall that previous chart where solar panels were super expensive back then. So that was when the solar industry needed that kickstart, and that was provided through these high feed-in tariffs. And yeah, as the industry's found its feet, the systems have become way less expensive. So those feed-in tariffs have reduced, and you probably expect it to stay pretty low into the future. Okay, another thing to be aware of is export limits. So now we're going to start talking kilowatts here. So I should explain what a kilowatt is for those who aren't aware. So it's a unit of power. So if you turn on a microwave oven, then it's drawing electrical power from your power point, and that's measured in kilowatts. And it's probably about 1 kilowatt of power when it's running for a microwave. So if you were to leave that microwave running for a whole hour, if you really wanted to nuke your bowl of cereal, then you would be using 1 kilowatt hour of energy over that hour. That's how much you'd be drawing from the power point. If you only ran it for half an hour, your bowl of cereal is still going to be pretty disgusting, but that would only use half a kilowatt hour of electrical energy. Okay, so kilowatts of power. So let's say you have, 13 solar panels on your roof. So that might be a total rated power of, say, 6 kilowatts. Now, the thing there is that's 6 kilowatts rated at like laboratory conditions where the sun's at just the right angle and it's full sunlight, there's no shade, there's no clouds, the panel's not too hot. So you're only going to get 6 kilowatts out of those 13 panels under those conditions. So most of the time they'll be generating more like 2, 3, 4, 5 kilowatts, right? Because the angle's wrong or there's shade or whatever. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Now, the company that owns the poles and wires in your area, so that might be like Gemina or Power Core would be the main ones in the main catchment area for this webinar. They are going to put some limits on how much electricity, how much power you can push into the grid at any point in time. Basically, because their poles of wires and transformers and stuff can't handle, all the houses going at full power on a sunny Sunday with mild weather. That can overload their grid. So at the moment, they're generally setting a fixed export limit. So say 5 kilowatts is the maximum that you're allowed to export at any point in time. So most of the time that wouldn't affect you, right? If you had your 6 kilowatt solar system and the angle's not quite right, no problem. Let's say it's perfect solar conditions, but you're running some appliances in your home. So panels generating 6, you're using 1.5. You're only going to be exporting 4.5 anyway. So again, that 5 kilowatts is not going to affect you. It's only if you've got perfect solar conditions and you're not using much in the house, then that export limit will kick in and it will say, oh, okay, the inverter is going to throttle back the power coming out of the panels. So they're only generating enough to export 5 out to the grid. That's how it generally works at the moment. And if you've got a 6 kilowatt or a 6.6 kilowatt system, it's no biggie. If you had a 10 kilowatt system or a 15 kilowatt or something, then you might start to be losing some energy over the year from these export limits. It's still not a bad deal. Now, in the future, that's probably going to move to a more of a variable, flexible export limit. So most of the time, you may be able to export 10 kilowatts if your system's that big and the solar conditions are high enough and you're not using much in your house. It'll only be when the local grid actually has an issue, then it'll be sending a signal to say, oh, okay, you can normally export 10, but at the moment you can only export 3. So that seems like a pretty good system as well, because it will actually enable more solar generation most of the time, and solar owners with big systems would benefit from that. Okay, so here's a very generic chart for a household, and this is like averaged out over a whole year. If you look at a single day of data, which I unfortunately do too often, it's not a nice curve like this. It's actually like spikes as people turn on appliances and turn them off again and stuff, right? So if you're generating in the middle of the day, then you can have a bit of a mismatch between when you're doing most of your generating and when you're doing most of your consumption. So it makes sense to try and consume more energy around the middle of the day if you've got solar panels on the roof. So hot water is a great way to do that. So in this picture, we've got an example of a electric hot water system with a tank full of hot water with insulation around it. That they all do have insulation. So your tank of hot water is going to stay hot for a few days, even if you had switched off the power, right? And this is a heat pump system. So it's got this like air conditioning unit beside it. And that makes it only uses about a quarter as much energy as an old style electric hot water system would. So if you're heating up hot water around the middle of the day, it's effectively going to be drawing the power straight from your solar panels. And that's probably the cheapest type of hot water that you can get. If your house is really well sealed and insulated, then you might actually benefit from pre-cooling your house in the middle of the day, or in the afternoon, so that maybe you're going to come home in the evening and you've already got your house nice and cool in summer, using that basically free electricity off your roof, or preheating it in winter. That doesn't really work for a standard house, unfortunately, because they're too leaky, and you just end up losing that cool air in summer or losing that warm air in winter before you actually get the benefit out of it. Um, uh, Going all electric, so that means replacing your gas appliances with electric ones as you get an opportunity to, as the old gas ones wear out. That's generally a good strategy. And electric vehicles, of course. So if you have the opportunity to charge up around the middle of the day, then that's perfect. All right, let's talk about batteries. So there's a bunch of reasons why you might do it. So some of those are fairly obvious, I guess. Tariff arbitrage, fancy word, but really it just means if you're charging up your batteries either from cheap solar in the middle of the day, or you may get a cheap electricity tariff in the middle of the day as well to import from the grid. That's probably going to become a lot more common as you know, we generally get an overabundance of electricity around the middle of the day, and that's where the grid's moving to as we get more solar, both rooftop and utility scale. So yeah, you charge up batteries with cheap energy, and then you can discharge during peak times when you're paying, you know, really high rates. So yep, that has a benefit on your bill. Keeping electricity on during a grid blackout, you have to be a little careful with that. Not all battery systems have that capability. It depends not only on the battery itself and the specifications, but also on how it's installed. So if that's what you want, then you have to really check with the solar installer and retailer that all those components are in place. And another level of that is, okay, even if your battery can power your house during a grid blackout, can your battery charge from solar during a grid blackout if you've got a blackout during the middle of the day? So that's another thing to check as well. There are systems that can do that. The last one, going off-grid. So the real definition of off-grid is you've severed your cable. You've got nothing connecting it to those poles and wires. So usually that only makes sense if, let's say, you're building a new house on a bush block, and getting the poles and wires extended to your house was going to cost you tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Then you might say, well, okay, rather than spending all of that money on poles and wires, I'll spend it on an off-grid solar system instead. If you're in the suburbs and you have an existing grid connection and you want to sever it, then really it's unlikely to be economic because you need lots of solar panels, you need big batteries, and you probably need a backup diesel or petrol generator as well. On a sunny day, you'll be fine. Like your batteries will be full by midday, but that's not the issue. The issue is when you have a whole week of cloudy, cold weather, you're hardly getting anything from your panel. So how do you cover that if you sever that connection? Okay, sustainability of a standard battery. So if you've got a solar system, adding a typical battery as an add-on, yeah, look, the environmental benefits are not that obvious. They're not that direct. It's you can make a case that, yep, okay, in the long term, if we want to have a 100% renewable electricity grid or nearly 100% renewable, then that system is going to have a lot of energy storage in it. So if you add a battery, then you're doing your bit for the system as a whole. So yeah, you can make that case, and that's valid if that's what you want to do. Great. But if you really focus in and say, okay, when I'm discharging that battery, is it going to be saving burning of coal? Well, in the evening, yeah, it would. You're discharging that battery after the sun's gone down. It's going to reduce how hard the coal-fired power stations have to work in the Latrobe Valley, sure. But there's a flip side, because the battery's not generating energy; it's just storing it. So when it was charging up the battery around the middle of the day, it was using energy that could have been coming from coal as well. So you may be just time shifting the burning of coal by operating that battery. So yeah, it's hard to make a really strong environmental case, like direct environmental benefit from adding a battery. Some people find that a bit hard to follow, but yeah, it is hard to make that case. There are specific cases where it does make a lot of sense. If you have a really harsh export limit, for example, if your poles and wires company in your area has said, yeah, sure, you can put on your 7 kilowatt solar system, but you can only ever export 1 kilowatt of power, then in that case, you would have heaps of times around the middle of the day when your solar panels are generating way less than what they could. And if that's the case, then yeah, potentially adding a battery will allow the panels to generate more, and that would have an environmental benefit. But yeah, most people in the suburbs are not getting such harsh export limits like that. And in the future, with flexible, then even fewer houses will be in that situation. Now, the economics of a battery, it's also hard to make a direct case for that adding a battery onto your solar system is going to pay for itself in a quick period of time. So yes, it is going to enhance your bill savings compared to just having solar by itself. But that additional annual saving off your electricity bills is not that big compared to the amount of money you have to pay on the battery. So like you may be paying $16,000, for example, for just the battery, and compared to the solar panels and the inverter and the other bits and pieces for the solar system, all of that may have only cost you $7,000. So you may be paying over 2 times as much for your solar system as you do for your battery. And the battery is not going to give you, 2 times of the additional bill savings of what your solar did. So yeah, generally when you're just focusing on the battery, it's hard to make that economic case. Often solar retailers will present it all bundled as a package. So they'll say, okay, your whole system, including the panels and the battery, you get a 7-year payback time. And that sounds pretty good. Okay. But that doesn't mean the battery by itself really made direct economic sense as that add-on, because you could have got a way cheaper system with just the solar system, and it may have paid for itself in 4 or 5 years. So that's the choice that you'd need to make there. How do batteries work? Okay, so this interesting diagram here, it's showing there's 2 different ways that you can you can install a battery and have that integrated into your system. So, okay, yeah, I will talk to this diagram. So you've got your panels and your solar inverter, that box on the wall. So that's all standard. We saw that in the previous diagrams, right? And then that's going into your switchboard in your house. Now, there's one way that you can install a battery is to have a battery inverter. So you've got your solar inverter and you've got a separate battery inverter, which is interfacing with the battery. So the battery's, say, discharging electricity, it's going through the battery inverter, and that's converting it into the standard household electricity to go into your house. So that's one way you can do it. And sometimes this battery inverter and the battery are all integrated into a single unit. So the best known example of that would be the Tesla Powerwall 2. So it's one unit, it's got the battery and it's got the inverter all in the same case. So this is a pretty flexible way to install a battery or add on a battery if you've got an existing solar system, because you don't have to mess with the solar system that's there already. The battery has its own cable that goes into the switchboard with its own circuit breaker safety switch thing. Which is good, because if you ask an installer to mess with an old solar system, often they're pretty reluctant for a bunch of reasons. One, they don't want to be taking responsibility for the workmanship, unknown workmanship of someone who came previously. And there's standards issues as well, because the Australian standards for solar installations have changed many times over the last decade. And the way the electricity rules work is, as soon as you go messing with something, then oftentimes you have to bring the whole thing up to current standards. So once the solar installer starts doing something to that old system, then they might find they have to replace the cables and the switches and the conduit that the cable came in, and you end up replacing the whole system basically. So yeah, doing it this way with a battery with its own inverter can often make pretty good sense. It also means that you have, when the sun's out, you can actually have a lot of power coming from your solar system as a whole, because you can have power coming from the solar inverter into the switchboard, and also power coming from the battery inverter into your switchboard. So if you've got heaps of stuff running at once, like induction stoves and electric vehicle chargers and hot water and aircon, and then that might actually be handy to be able to power all that for a period from both of those inverters. That's pretty good. Now, this diagram shows a different way that you can set up a battery system. So here, we've got the solar panels on the roof, powering the inverter on the wall, the solar inverter, but this is a special solar inverter. It's got connections not only for the solar panels to come in with cables, it also has a connection on the bottom for cables from a battery. So positive and negative for the battery, and also some communications to control the battery. So that's generally called a hybrid solar inverter, where you can plug that battery in as well. So in this case, we only have one inverter. So there's pluses and minuses. It can be a cheaper way to set it up, because you're not paying for two inverters. The power that you can get out is limited though, because if, let's say you had a 6.6 kilowatt solar system, might be a 5 kilowatt inverter. So yeah, that's the maximum that inverter can put out is 5 kilowatts in that case. Even though your battery could put out more, let's say you're getting 4 kilowatts from your panels and your battery could put out, I don't know, 6 kilowatts. You might think, oh, great, we can get 10 kilowatts, but you've got that bottleneck of that 5 kilowatt inverter. 5 kilowatts is still a fair bit though, but if you were charging your EV and running your induction cooktop and your aircon, then you'd find that you're automatically importing some power from the grid at that point in time to make up the difference. So yeah, doing it this way, it's called DC coupled, because we're talking about direct current electricity coming from the solar panels and the battery. Yeah, it's a pretty good option, especially if you're going for a package system like installation all at the same time with the panels and the battery. Yeah, it can be a good option. Oh, it can also help if your local poles and wires company has some limitations on your total inverter capacity. So if they're saying, oh, okay, the maximum inverter capacity that we're going to allow is 5 kilowatts. So if you had your 5 kilowatt solar system and your 5 kilowatt battery inverter, then they might not actually allow that. But with the hybrid inverter, it works. Okay, so here's some extra information resources. I won't go through all of them, but yeah, lots of good information there. Rebates for batteries. It's changing over time. Governments keep changing their mind. Well, maybe that's a bit unfair. They keep evolving their programs, and at the moment, Solar Victoria, basically the Victorian government, it's not providing an upfront rebate as such off the price of the battery, but what they are doing is an interest-free loan up to 8,800. So that's pretty good amount. Not everyone is eligible, so you have to check the eligibility criteria, like I think it's on income levels or property prices, that kind of stuff. They're not offering it to the real top end of town. So yeah, that option's there. How do you get the most out of your battery? We saw this before. Okay, so in this case, the diagram has that green blob in the middle. So what that's saying is that some of your excess electricity that you would have been exporting in the middle of the day, that that sort of area there, representing an amount of electrical energy. Now that's going to go into the battery instead of being exported out to the grid. And then at the evening time, you'll be drawing electricity from the battery and using that to power appliances in your house automatically. So the system will be operating to try and minimize imports from the grid and minimize exports to the grid. So you're self-consuming your own energy as much as possible. And then if the battery's lasted through the night, then in the morning as well, and that battery may still be powering your home or part of your home. That's the sort of default way that batteries work, solar batteries. Time shifting, we've talked about this. Hot water systems. So we've got the same heat pump hot water system we saw before, a different type of heat pump hot water system that has a more compact air conditioner unit, a heat pump, and so that can be integrated in the top of the tank. They tend to be a bit noisier and not as efficient as these larger units that are standalone, but obviously more compact. And this is a old-fashioned resistive electric hot water. So uses about 4 times as much power as these other options, but it's a much cheaper unit to buy. So if you were putting in a very big solar system and you had heaps of power to spare in the middle of the day, then this could be a valid option as well. They're also very simple, like they don't have moving parts, should last a long time. The thing to watch out for is if you have a really cloudy day, then even if you've got it on a timer running like around the middle of the day, your solar may not be covering it all. So you may still be importing grid electricity to heat up a portion of that energy to heat your water. And there are ways around that, but may not have time to cover them in this presentation. We have other webinars to talk about all that type of stuff. Now, virtual power plant. So this is like an optional deal that you may be offered when you're purchasing a solar battery. So really what it means is you're getting a battery, right? If you don't join a virtual power plant, then you're pretty much in control of how your battery operates. You can operate as we just saw before, or if you wanted to go on some special electricity tariff that was tied with the wholesale price of electricity that bounces around all the time like a stock market, and you wanted to sit there watching the prices with your finger over the mouse button and go, okay, discharge now. Okay, charge now, discharge now. Then you've got control. You could do that if you wanted to. Not many people would be that keen. Okay, so a virtual power plant is where you actually give up some control over how your battery operates to a remote company. So it might be your electricity retailer like Origin, AGL, Energy Australia. And occasionally they're going to send a remote signal to your battery to say, discharge now. Okay, so why would you want to allow some big company to mess with your battery? Well, because they're going to give you some incentive to do it. And that could be in the form of a cheaper battery up front, like they'll actually subsidize the price of the battery for you. Or it could be in the form of ongoing payments, monthly or per event or however they do it. There's all different types of VPPs. And so if you are going to join, then you really should read the fine print. So ideally, it's only going to be a rare occasion where they do take control of your battery. It might only be a handful of times a year. It actually makes a fair bit of sense, because like 360 days of the year, you use it for your purposes of bill saving, for example. So you're saving on importing peak power from the grid all through the evening, for example. And then 5 days a year, the battery gets used to effectively help out the grid, and the company earns money from that on the stock market type wholesale spot price, and you get some benefit from it as well. So it's like it's getting multiple benefits from the same battery. You're getting your benefits, 360 days a year, which is pretty good, and they're getting their benefits on the 5 days a year when they really need it, and you're helping the grid, you're helping the transition to renewable energy. So that's pretty good too. But yeah, you do need to read the fine print and be aware of what's going on. One thing to be aware of or careful of is if they're going to work your battery hard every day, cycle it really hard, then is that going to wear out your battery faster? Because a battery, your lifespan's already fairly limited. You're looking at probably 10 or 15 years compared to the solar panels, where you're looking at more like 20 or 25 years. So yeah, that's something to be aware of. Okay, let's think about considerations if you're buying solar and batteries. How much do you spend on energy? So if you're already super frugal and you use only a very small amount of electricity, there are people out there who do that, and good on them. And gas, LPG, other stuff. If you're super frugal, then if your bill's already small, then the amount of benefit available to you from putting in solar isn't as large. So if you put in a really big fancy solar system, you may be overcapitalizing a bit. On the other hand, if you are running your whole house aircon on reverse cycle in winter and cooling in summer on a thermostat 24/7, and you've got your pool pump, and you've got 5 teenage kids with long hair that have 2 long showers every day on high flow rates, and they're using heaps of hot water, and you've got an electric vehicle, and if you're using lots of energy, then the opportunity your first opportunity would be to use less energy, frankly. You also have a really big opportunity to get big savings through solar and batteries. Think about your appliances. So how much of them are electric? How much of them are gas? Are they reaching the end of their life? Might you switch over some of your gas ones to electric in the future? If that's the case, then your electricity consumption might actually go up, and in a good way, because you're avoiding that gas consumption. In which case, that may justify a bigger solar system. What are your motivations? And is there a place to install a battery on your property? That's one we'll come back to later. There's a whole bunch of calculators out there that can help you sort of size a system for solar and batteries. The only one I'll mention there is the Renew one right at the bottom. Sunulator, that was actually my creation back some years ago when I was working at Renew. So it's not the easiest to use, to be honest. It is based on Excel, but if you are a bit of a nerd and you like getting your hands dirty, then it's actually pretty powerful. Okay, I've mentioned the blackout backup pitfall. If you do want to power your house during a blackout, then you have to think about what appliances do I want to cover. Lights, easy. Laptops, internet router, easy. Electronic gadgets, easy. A whole house ducted aircon, very unlikely that you'll run that through the whole night on a hot day or a cold night. Just think about what are your essential appliances that you want to run, and the electricians have ways to segregate parts of your electric consumption in the house so that they're the circuits that will get backed up. Inverter limit, I've talked about that. Okay, location. So we have another slide about this, but there's an Australian standard that came out a few years ago that does limit the locations where you're allowed to put a battery, and we have a discussion paper from Renew that I wrote that talks about that a bit. If you want to buy the Australian standard, you can, but unfortunately you have to buy it, which is really dumb. You don't want the battery to get too hot. Actually, if the battery gets below 10 degrees or so, then it may have a, limited power levels as well. If it's in a garage, if it's possible that a car or a van might bump it, then you may need to have a bollard installed to protect the battery. Watch out for battery warranties and warranty conditions because it's a bit of an investment. Like typical battery investment, yeah, $10,000-15,000. So yeah, it's worth checking out what you're actually getting. Okay, so location, you're basically limited to putting it either in a garage or up against an external wall of a home. And if you're on that external wall, then if the room behind it is habitable, a lot of installers will probably say, "Oh, yeah, any room is habitable. Just do it." Then they'll probably have to put a fairly thick sheet of like fiber cement to these sort of dimensions to mount the battery on, and you're not allowed to have any other things like within those dimensions from the battery. So gas bottles, gas meters, air conditioning units, windows, hot water units. So in some homes, like especially townhouses or units and stuff, it can be quite hard to identify like a suitable location to put a battery. So it's another thing to be aware of. Oh, and the reason for this is the batteries we're talking about, they're basically all lithium ion LFP chemistries. And the standard is, it doesn't really differentiate much between the different chemistries of the batteries in the whole lithium family. And it's possible that if a battery gets caught up in a fire, whether or not it was started by the battery, it could have come from somewhere else. The battery, especially some chemistries of batteries, that they can burn pretty severely and let off pretty nasty smoke and be really hard to put out as a fire. So that's the main reason why the standard has set these sorts of criteria. Okay, so think about it, check it out. The economics, in most cases, the economics of a battery, like direct bill saving, is not that amazing. And the direct environmental benefit is not that amazing, but there are some valid reasons why you might want to get it. And if your situation is not typical, then yeah, economics or environment may actually work out pretty well. Okay, so let's talk about who you'd be dealing with in terms of companies. So there's normally two levels of company that you deal with. There's a retailer. They're the people who are advertising, that you're talking to a salesperson, negotiating prices. They'll be helping you work out what size system you need, all that kind of stuff. They're managing the deal. And they have to take responsibility for the whole thing, especially if they're approved seller under the New Energy Tech Consumer Code, which they pretty much all are in Victoria, because of the way the Victorian government incentives work. Okay, so that's one level. That's the retailer who you're dealing with, and then you have the installer, and they're usually subcontracted by the retailer. There are some small companies that do the whole thing. So they're the installer. They're the team of tradies that actually goes out and does a job, and they deal with you as a retailer. But they're more rare these days, and they tend to be more expensive. They're a bit more boutique. So most of the time, you've got these two levels, and the people who actually turn up on your site to do the work, they're subcontractors. So anytime you've got a subcontractor and a responsible person at the top, there's always that potential that something will get lost in the cracks. So that's just a thing to be aware of. So choosing a good retailer, there's these net CC approved sellers. That's a good starting point. Word of mouth is always good. Like just like if you were doing any other sort of major home improvement, like installing a deck or renovating your kitchen or whatever, then yeah, word of mouth is a good idea. Warranties, you can check. Multiple quotes, yep, as with any other major home improvement, get a few quotes. Okay, so the risk of cowboy installers. Yeah, you definitely don't want them jumping on the panels with their boots and spurs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd be asking the retailer, how do they deal with their contractors, their installers? How do they choose them? If there's some issue, then how is the retailer going to take responsibility for that? How would they fix it up? The quote should be telling you where the panels are going, where the inverter's going, battery if you're getting one. So you should understand what you're expecting is going to happen on the day, and then when the tradies turn up, I would communicate with them fairly clearly and say, okay, here's what I'm expecting. If it looks like anything's not going to work like that, if you have to make any changes, then let me know first. There's an accreditation for an installer, which is with the individual. So one person on the job at least is going to have that accreditation, and they should be there at key points in the job. And they actually now have to take selfie photos of themselves at the job at these key points, so that the regulators can check up on them if necessary. So understand who that person is, and yeah, be talking to them about these issues. Double check what brand and model of panel, battery, solar inverter they're going to be installing, and that matches what was promised to you by the retailer. If it doesn't quite match, it's probably just because the retailer was selling you the December model, and now the installer's installing in January, and it's a slightly updated model. It's actually a little bit better. Okay, that's fine. But yeah, there have been cases where there's been a switcheroo and the customer gets something inferior to what they were promised, which is not what you want. Where are the cables going to go? Is it going to be on the outside of the wall in like a plastic cover or something? Do you care about that? Is it going to be ugly, or is it going to be concealed in the wall? So I'd be talking to them about these sorts of things, and then at the end of the job, the installer should be handing everything over to you before they go. There's a bunch of documentation that you should get. They should be showing you how to check that the system's working. Like any solar system that you get, there should be a way to do that. There's different levels of monitoring you can get to, understand what it's doing at any point in time. But yeah, there should be that handover process. Okay, warranties. So yeah, as I said, solar panels should be expecting up to 20 to 25 years. So that's the panels on the roof, because they're mostly aluminium and glass, like pretty long-lived materials. The inverters, you might be talking 10 to 15 years. Batteries, 10 to 15 years, how long they last. So the warranty length compared to how long the product lasts, often they're sort of similar. Installation warranty, yeah. So check if you did have a problem with one of these components, then how would it get fixed within that warranty period? Yeah. All right. So that's the end of the presentation.
Yeah, we've had a few questions come through, so I'll just go through some of those now. If you have a solar system with a 66-cent tariff and update your system, do you lose your premium tariff?
Okay, so this is for households that got in and installed solar in like 2009, 2010, 2011. So there were a real minority of solar systems in the community now. And these were sort of early adopters, and they got the benefit of this. Any excess electricity they export to the grid at any point in time is actually earning them a lot of money, which is good. On the flip side, they had to pay a lot for their system when it was installed in the first place. Okay. So those households that they'll only be getting that good feed-in tariff until I think it's mid next year, sometime next year. And after that, they'll just be going back on the normal small tariff like everyone else. Okay. So a lot of those solar systems back then, they were small. They were like, 1.5 kilowatts, for example, whereas now you're talking like 6.5, 7 kilowatts, 8, 10. Okay, so you have a bunch of people that are saying, "Oh, I've only got a few panels on the roof. Yeah, I could do with some more, but if I do, am I going to get kicked off this good feed-in tariff?" According to the paperwork, like the rules, when that system was set up, then yeah, you would get kicked off. But you've only got another 6 months or so to go anyway, so it may not be such a big deal. And in reality, we've heard a lot of cases of people that have upgraded their solar system and they actually haven't got kicked off. They're still getting that good 66-cent feed-in tariff. So I think in reality, it's coming to the end of that scheme, and the authorities aren't really caring that much anymore about chasing people down when there's only a few months to go. So yeah, look, I'd say if you want to upgrade, just upgrade, really.
Very good. Next question I've got here is, can you comment on the government's desire to dynamically control solar exports?
Right. Yep. So that's something I covered in one of the earlier slides. I'm talking about flexible feed-in export limits. Dynamic control is another term for it. Dynamic operating envelopes. The jargon is just a bit silly sometimes, but so that's doing what I was describing previously. So at the moment, in most areas you have like a standard fixed export limit of 5 kilowatts. So let's say you had a 10 kilowatt solar system, then when it is sunny, then you're like every sunny day, your system is going to be missing out on a fair bit of generation around the middle of the day, because it's throttling itself back to 5 kilowatts. Under this new flexible dynamic system, which is already operating in some places in South Australia, and I think coming in Western Australia soon, and it's pretty clear it's going to come in Victoria as well. Under this new system, what we should see is your default export limit, instead of being 5, it should be something like 10. So that's a big benefit right off from the start. If you've got a 10 kilowatt solar system, then it'll be free to export a lot most of the time, right? So the smart thing is that only at those times when the grid is actually stressed, like it's a mild day, it's a Sunday, your businesses aren't using electricity, households aren't using much electricity because they're not running their air cons or their heaters. So you've got a big oversupply coming into the infrastructure of the grid. It's only at those times when your solar system will receive a signal that says, okay, we have to limit you to 5 or 3 or whatever it is. So yeah, at those times you'll be missing out on generating, but most of the time you'll actually be able to generate more than you would have previously. So it actually does make a lot of sense for solar owners and also for the system as a whole. Now some people have a concern about Well, it means that I have to have this control signal coming in, like internet connection usually is how it works. So, what if the government wants to control it more than what they said they would at the start, or hackers, for example? Well, yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is a concern, but the inverter companies are all pretty on top of that. The grid companies are very mindful of that, and yeah, it's been working pretty well in South Australia already. So I think it's a pretty good. It really is the way of the future because if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, like if you're putting in a solar system, it was like a unicorn. It was a pinprick in the overall grid. Now we're getting up to times when South Australia, for example, rooftop solar, not even including utility solar, rooftop solar is generating the amount of power that would cover the entire state's demand. So when that happens, electricity systems are very complex and they're dynamic and they have to be monitored like minute to minute, second to second, and controlled. So when rooftop solar actually is that significant, it does have to have some level of control over it. Otherwise, we're going to get blackouts and we'll get people saying, solar's no good, renewables are no good. So, yeah.
Next question I've got here is more in relation to the roof condition prior to installing solar. Obviously, it's sort of a bit broad, but
Right.
I guess, yeah, in your experience, do you find that people need to do sort of any kind of reinforcements to their roof before installing solar? I'm thinking probably more like tiled roofs might need to have a bit of a zhuzh beforehand, but
Okay, so there's two levels. There's the structure of your roof, like is it able to bear the weight of the solar panels? In most houses, that's not an issue. Have heard about some houses that were built to they were cost cutting to within an inch of their life, and the structure of the roof was only just able to hold itself up and deal with winds. And so if you add the solar panels on, then it might have been an issue, but most houses that's not an issue. And solar installers should have a reasonable handle on that. So structure, I'm not so concerned about. Okay, then the covering of the roof is the next one. So if you've got like rusty ColourBond metal roof, or if you've got 40-year-old tiles that are really brittle. So a really old roof like that that's going to need replacing in like 5 or 10 years just because it's going to start cracking and leaking, right? If your roof's going to need replacing soon, then you're probably best to hold off on the solar until you fix up your roof. Otherwise, yeah, you really don't want to have to take the solar panels off, fix up the roof, and then put them back on again, because that comes into all those issues with the standards that I mentioned previously. Like if someone's going to mess with the old solar system, even taking it off and putting it back on again, then you can open up a can of worms. So yeah, you do want your roof to have a fair bit of life in the roof before you put the solar on. Yeah, I think that answers the question, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think yep. Thanks, Andrew. Next question here is, why can't solar energy run a house during a blackout? So this is a question. My parents have solar actually, and there was a blackout in their street, and they were like, why couldn't we still use our appliances with just the solar?
Yeah, no, that's a common question. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Okay, so if you've got a standard solar system, so you've got your panels on your roof, you've got your standard grid connect inverter on the wall, and that goes into your switchboard. The issue is that standard inverter it's not designed robust enough to be able to to cope with your appliances flicking on and off, right? It's really just designed to cooperate with the grid. So the grid's there, right? And they're sort of working together. But if the grid wasn't there, then if you suddenly flick on your oven, then it'll spit the dummy basically. So that's one reason. The next reason is if you want to power the house, then and everyone else is blacked out, then you don't want to be trying to power all your neighbors as well, because your solar inverter is not going to cope with like trying to run all the other houses as well. So you need to have an actual switch that's going to separate your property while you're trying to power it during a blackout, like an isolator switch, a contactor, automatic transfer switch. So yeah, most normal solar systems don't have that included, because the standard grid connected inverter is not robust enough anyway. So if you want to do that, then you generally need an inverter that can do it, which like a special breed of inverter, probably a battery as well, and that switch to island your property from the rest of the grid. So yeah, it's possible. As a halfway house, there are some inverters that can still keep going in a blackout to some extent, but rather than powering a switchboard, they just have a cable going straight from the inverter to a dedicated power point, a general power outlet wall outlet in your home. So if you don't want to go to the expense of like a fancy inverter and battery and all that, then that can be a good option. So there's not that many options out there. So pretty much the main one is the Fronius Gen 24 Plus. So it's a hybrid inverter. It can have a battery plugged into it, but yeah, it can also have that just that single power point in your home, which is energized while the sun's out. So that's pretty handy. You can put a power board on that. You can have your fridge running, your internet router. Don't try and run your oven off it because its output is limited to the solar conditions at any point in time. So yeah.
Well, I'll provide that intel to my parents. Have you got any, next question, have you got any tips or tricks in terms of maximizing, I guess, appliance usage during the day to benefit from when the solar is being generated?
Yep. Some dishwashers and washing machines have a built-in timer function. So that's a good one to investigate up front. Hot water is a really good option. So if you've already got an electric hot water system, then you could get an electrician to put like a timer in your switchboard. So it's energizing your hot water system at between say 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. or something. You want to think about those power levels, as I was saying. If like most hot water systems have a pretty powerful element in it, so they just work like a kettle, right? Your kettle's probably 2 kilowatts of power. Your standard hot water system is probably more like 3.6 kilowatts or even 4.8 kilowatts of power. So the issue there is that if that's drawing 4.8 kilowatts and a cloud comes over and your system's only putting out 2 kilowatts, then you'll be drawing 2 kilowatts from the grid. How do you get around that? You could put a lower power element into your hot water system. So instead of 3.6, you might go 1.8, for example. So it would be running at a lower power level for longer hours. That can be pretty effective. If you do have high hot water consumption, though, that's another thing to consider. Is your tank big enough? If you're only running it in the middle of the day, is that tank of water going to supply enough showers for you? For most households, it would. But yeah, if you do have those long-haired, sporty teenagers like standing under the shower for ages, then maybe not. Or if you have a whole bunch of guests coming. So Okay. And there are some other gadgets you can get, like a hot water diverter, which actually is like a dimmer switch that can adjust the power level of that element in your hot water tank, so that if the cloud comes over, then you would have been exporting 2 kilowatts out to the grid. Okay, it'll dial up the hot water to 2 kilowatts, so it's soaking up that excess power. They're pretty clever, but they're unfortunately fairly expensive for what they are. So, yeah. Sorry, I've sort of gone into hot water a fair bit. Electric vehicles is another big one. I mean, at the moment, electric vehicles is the availability is still not so good. The government policies upcoming should help that, and the price differential compared to a standard petrol diesel car is still fairly high, but that will come down. So when that opportunity comes, then that's a really good way to soak up electricity. And yeah, actually, if you are weighing up, like, okay, do I spend $15,000 on a solar battery? One of the things you should be throwing into that equation is, what else could I do with that $15,000? And one thing you could do is maybe I save up that money and put it towards, if I'm going to be changing over my car in a few years, then if I saved up that money, I could maybe go for an electric car instead of a petrol one. And in that case, that car has a big battery in it. So, and many of the cars coming out now, you can run extension lead and a power board off your car and run things. And they're also moving towards actually being able to, the cable that you plug into your car will actually also be able to go the other direction. So your power would be able to run your switchboard and run your house. So where we're going to be in a few years probably is, it'll be fairly standard to be able to use your car as a solar battery, either for reducing your bills or for running your home in a blackout. So if that's an option for you, if you have off-street parking, well, the downside of that is you can only use it as a home battery when the car is at home. So if you're buggered off somewhere and your family's like needs it as a battery, then you're out of luck. But apart from that issue, we're talking like 4 times, 5 times the size of a Tesla Powerwall 2 in a typical EV. So it's a big battery. You're already buying that battery anyway for transport. So if you can get dual use out of it, that's going to be a pretty compelling proposition, I think, in a few years. So, yeah, that's good to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question I have here is about the different sort of brands and installers for batteries. I guess I could just elaborate on that a little bit and ask, is there an equivalent to, say, like the Solar Quotes website for batteries, so that you know that you're getting, just in that pursuit of like making sure that you're getting a good installer, a good brand, and not getting, not taken for a ride, basically. It's a good question. One general comment I'd make is there's been a galaxy of like battery models that have come out in the past 10 years, and not all of them have taken off in the market. So some models are a bit like speculative. It's like every company wants to have their battery offering, but I think it's a really good idea to go with a battery which actually does have a good uptake. So it's a well-known, proven product. There's a lot of installers out there with experience in it. I guess it's a bit like cars. If you buy some really exotic, rare car, then down the track, trying to get someone to work on it or whatever might be tricky. So it's the same principle with batteries. Solar panels, not so much of an issue. I mean, they've become a bit of a commodity now, most of them. Some have better features than others, but
yeah, not such a consideration. In solar inverters, also a bit of a commodity, but if you're going for like a hybrid inverter or a battery inverter, then yeah, again, go for one that's got a bit of traction in the marketplace. So how do you know which ones those are? You mentioned Solar Quotes. They've got a lot of information and also user reviews. Other places you can get information and assistance would be there's discussion forums out there. So there's one on a website called Whirlpool. They've got a energy forum where people help each other with opinions, advice. On Facebook, there's My Efficient Electric Home, which is a huge discussion forum, very active. You can get lots of help there. Through Renew, of course, as a member, then there's member groups, heaps of information available through our publications, etc. So yeah, hopefully that helps give some options.
Yeah, great. I think this is a relatively simple question. So you need to replace your solar inverter after, say, 10 years, but the solar panels are good for another, they're fine. The question is just whether or not it's easy to replace the inverter only.
It should be.
Yeah.
It should be. If it's a really old style inverter, like there were some that used a different technology with like the magnet stuff in it, and they like got really heavy metal components in it, like isolated transformer inverters. Everything now, well, almost everything now is transformerless. They're just using little chips and things rather than big chunks of metal. So if you had one of those and you need to replace it, there are some conditions in the standards about you may have a little bit of trouble, but apart from that, it should be okay. You shouldn't have to like get your whole system brought up to current standards if all it is you're taking out a 5 kilowatt inverter and putting in another 5 kilowatt inverter. That should be okay.
Cool.
But yeah, you need a qualified installer to check that.
Oh, next question I've got here. If you want to add new panels to an old solar system, do you need a whole new system? That is, say, new inverter, additional. Do you need to just redo the whole thing, or can you sort of bolt on extra panels?
Yeah. Okay. So you got your panels feeding your inverter on the wall, right? So the panels are normally in groups, like a string of panels. So it might be, say, 10 panels going into one cable into your inverter, and then you may have 10 more panels going into a second cable into your inverter, because most inverters have like 2 inputs. So that means you can have 10 panels facing west and 10 panels facing east, for example, and they operate kind of independently. So because the panels are kind of working together, it can be tricky if you just wanted to add in a couple of panels, well, you might have already reached the maximum on that input into the inverter, like the maximum current or the maximum voltage. So if you're adding more, then it would exceed the specs of the inverter on that input. Also, you want the panels to all be mostly the same. So if you had like a 300 watt panel and now the panels are all like 400 watts, different power levels, then you might not. You might have to put a special extra gadget on the panel to make it play nicely with the others. To be honest, like most installers are going to be pretty wary of doing those things. Your main options are going to be, first option is you can put it like a second whole system. So you've got your existing inverter, your existing panels, you leave them, and you put in a second inverter with its own panels. That's a pretty good option. If you've got good roof space that's going to accommodate that second system, yeah, that's good. There's micro inverters. So the the only real brand operating in any volume is Enphase. They've got a good reputation. So that's like a different technology. There's no inverter on the wall. Instead, each panel has its own little inverter underneath it. And you get 240 volt AC standard household kind of power coming straight out of the panel. And they all connect up together and go into your switchboard. So that technology has more freedom with like the number of panels. So if you just wanted to put a few panels over there and a couple of panels over there, then that can be done through microinverters. Or the other option is, okay, you've got this old system, it's taking up your prime real estate on the roof, and you've got a bit of space on that side and a bit of space on that side, but it's going to be tricky to use them both. And the panels are 10 years old, the inverter's 10 years old, and in some cases, it just does make sense to take off the old system and just put on a nice big system that's going to use up that whole space efficiently, new rails that go the whole way. I know it feels wrong to do that often. When you're taking off panels that still have a fair bit of life in them, it can be hard to reuse those panels that come off the roof. It's hard to put them onto another roof, mainly because, again, standards that have changed. So the old panels that they may be fine, but they may not have gone through the test for like fire safety that's required now. So you're not actually allowed to put it on a roof of a house again, just because it hasn't had that paperwork tick. They can still be used for other purposes, like out on a farm. You put some panels on ground mounts to run a pump down your dam or something. Camping, they can be used for those sorts of things. Whether they actually will or not is a question, but those are your options. And sometimes it does make sense to just bite the bullet and say, okay, I was an early adopter. I put these panels in. They've given me 10 good years, and even though they have some life in them, my electricity consumption's gone up. I've gone off gas. I'm getting an EV. I do need a really good big system, and maybe it does make sense to take off the old ones and put a proper big new system in.
Cool. All right, probably only got time for one or two more questions. Got one here just around future proofing. So if someone was about to get solar PV and they're not quite ready for a battery, is there anything that they need to sort of consider ahead of time to make sure that they're not sort of
exploring the option of a battery in the future? Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is if you're considering a battery, try and pick out a spot where it's going to go. So I talked about that a bit in the presentation. If you're going to add in a battery later on, then it's almost certainly going to be AC coupled, which means the battery will have its own inverter. So it'll have a normal household 240 volt AC cable going to the switchboard with its own circuit breaker in the switchboard. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. Don't really need to consider too much about compatibility of your solar system with your battery, because if your battery is AC coupled into the switchboard by itself, then it doesn't directly interact with the solar system that much. Sizing, if you are going to add a battery, then you're probably going to want to have a bigger solar system so that you're covering that energy the battery is going to be drawing to charge itself up during the day. That's probably the main thing would be the sizing. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Probably time for this is a bit of last question. Where was I? It was just about, I can't actually find it on the screen, but it was just about maintaining solar panels and getting them cleaned, and whether or not it's sort of, the person can do that themselves, or they should be paying a contractor to do it every X number of years or whatever. Yeah.
are you comfortable and agile enough to get up on the roof yourself? Is the question.
Mm,
For a lot of people, the answer is no. Cleaning them is pretty much, hose or a gentle mop sort of thing. Not too different from cleaning a window. Most people find that they don't need to get their solar panels cleaned, but it 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 depends on the microclimate, right? It depends on the winds and the angle of the panels. If they're really flat, they tend to build up dirt more. If they've got at least a 10-degree tilt, then they tend to get automatically washed off by the rain. But it also depends on what type of dust you have in your area. Like if it's dust that's come from like a sandy soil, then it probably washes off easier. If it's dust from a clay soil, then it might actually stick and build up on the panels. What type of birds do you have, and what type of poo are the birds pooing? There are individual conditions. Have you got some weird gum tree with like some kind of sap? So it can vary, but most people find that okay, their panels get a little bit dirty, but for the slight drop in output, it's not worth paying someone to get up there and clean it. So yeah.
brilliant. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much all that we have time for today. There's a lot of questions that came through, so I do apologize to people who didn't get their questions answered. I tried to, get through as many as possible. But yeah, thanks very much, Andrew, for that very interesting presentation. I certainly learned a few things despite working in this industry for many years. And yeah, thanks very much as well for answering all of those questions that came through. And thank you everyone for attending today, this solar and battery webinar. It was a pleasure delivering it all for you all.